Okay, members, it's time for questions to the Executive Office. Question 11 has been withdrawn, and I call Robbie Butler to ask the first question. Mr. Butler.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Communities in Transition is a vital element of the Executive's work to tackle paramilitarism, criminality and organised crime. The programme continues to have a transformative impact on communities and is making a positive difference in people's lives. It is increasing the number of people participating in community life, improving skills and confidence, and reducing the space for paramilitaries and criminal elements to operate. As with the rest of the Executive's Tackling Paramilitary Activity, Criminality and Organised Crime programme, the Communities in Transition project has now moved on to its second phase of activity. This phase of activity will last until March 2024 and will be supported with an initial contribution of £10 million over that period. We will continue to consider options to augment this budget where possible. In May this year, a series of public procurement competitions were initiated, which resulted in the award of 22 new interventions, and more recently, 2 further interventions have been awarded, while others are currently being evaluated.
Supplementary, Robbie Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I take this opportunity to congratulate the former First Minister and former leader of the Democratic Unionist Party in taking up her position with Corporation Ireland, who are a stakeholder within this. The First Minister, years of tackling intergenerational issues related to troubles, has identified our young people as being the most adversely affected by paramilitarism and radicalisation. These areas correlate to low levels of educational attainment. What steps is being taken to address educational underachievement in the identified areas as a key to unlocking a future free of the chains of fear and hatred?
Mr. Speaker, the member is right in terms of one of the key ways that we can try and help young people is through that educational approach, particularly whenever it comes to underachievement. And he knows in our own constituency the work that's taken place through the Resurgam Trust and that early intervention project, which is now yielding real tangible benefits. So he is right to highlight that. Also is around employability. So people have that opportunity to gain opportunities employment, and that's a key part of the 8 areas within the CIT areas in terms of work that's ongoing around that.
As the Minister knows, the Community and Transition Project was recommendation B4 of the Executive Action Plan, tackling paramilitarism, criminality and organised crime, and this is part of a package to support transition. The delivery of B4 is going well, so will the Minister now commit to ensure the progress is also made on the Executive commitment to adopt the recommendations of the review panel that Fair Employment and Treatment Order 1998 should be amended?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He is right to be highlighting again where you can gain opportunities for employment. I know this is an issue which has been raised in terms of the legislation that pertains around that, but that is something which is still under consideration. I know the member highlights where there were recommendations in respect of that, but it would require legislative change if that was to be taken forward.
Call George Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could I ask the First Minister's assessment of the recent meeting with the institutions about financial contributions?
I think that might be for a later question on historical institutional abuse, but I'll answer it whenever we get to that.
Okay, Dolores Kelly.
Speaker, I know the First Minister gave a glowing report there to the Communities in Transition, but and undoubtedly there is some good work going on, but I wonder, in terms of an independent review of the work of the Communities in Transition programme, and indeed looking at who exactly benefits and whether or not the outcomes are actually meeting the objectives of the programme overall.
Well, there is an evaluation of what was the first phase of this project, which is in the latter stages of that being drafted. So there will be that kind of work to review the impact that the initial phase has had. That will obviously be shaping the second phase. But these are difficult areas that people are having to work in, trying to assist communities to transition. And trying to undermine the corrosive power that paramilitary organisations have had in communities for far too long. So this is something that requires considered and painstaking efforts to be made on it, and that takes time in order to see those benefits being realised. But there is evidence in parts of Northern Ireland where this has made a positive impact.
Thank you. And I call Rosemary Barton.
Thank you. Question 2.
Mr Speaker, the Executive Office wasn't able to reach an agreed response to this question.
Supplementary, Rosemary Barton.
Thank you. First Minister, I understand that a number of UK-wide projects are in development. If you look at some of the questions that were asked in Westminster by your colleague Carla Lockhart, I'm wondering if you could advise where these would be taking place in Northern Ireland or where they are situated.
Well, Mr Speaker, it is a remarkable achievement that Her Majesty the Queen will next year celebrate her Platinum Jubilee, and I'm sure that many throughout Northern Ireland are looking forward to witnessing this historic and unprecedented event. The Northern Ireland Office is engaging with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport in relation to plans to mark the Platinum Jubilee, and I would anticipate further information on these. I do understand that the main focus of the Jubilee celebrations will actually be on the weekend of the 2nd to the 5th of June, which will include a bank holiday that will be observed here in Northern Ireland, and this will provide an opportunity for organisations and local communities to design their own events to mark that occasion. So, Mr Speaker, I look forward to the opportunities that we will have to mark this historic event, and I know departments within the Executive will look at that. Local councils will obviously be an area where we will be able to see support being provided for this, because it is right that we would mark this very significant occasion in our history.
Call down, Dodds.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the First Minister. People across Northern Ireland will be rightly appalled that the Executive Office has not been able to agree such a simple question as to how we would celebrate with Her Majesty the remarkable years on the throne. Does the First Minister agree with me that this is just another one of those Sinn Féin tactics which causes great hurt and harm within the community in general in Northern Ireland, among those who respect, show loyalty to Her Majesty? And will the First Minister commit to further engagement to see if there can be a fund for communities in Northern Ireland to properly recognise this important occasion?
Mr Speaker, I am disappointed that there wasn't agreement within the Executive Office for a response to be officially communicated on behalf of both I and the Deputy First Minister. However, that's for others to explain. I think it is right that we would be marking this occasion, and it is a test, particularly for Republicans and Nationalists, as to how they are going to recognise and facilitate those within our community that want to pay tribute and to celebrate what is a historic occasion for Her Majesty the Queen. So many people talk about respect, equality, celebrating diversity. This will be a test for Sinn Féin. How are they going to do that? How will they facilitate those that want to mark this occasion to be able to do that? Because we have had evidence when it came to this estate and the marking of the centenary that was blocked. I hope that we're not going to be in a position, after some good work by those in Sinn Féin who did reach out and meet with members of the royal family, now retrenching and taking a backward step. Let us hope that that's not the position that we are moving into.
Call Jim Allister.
Isn't there a pattern here? The Sinn Féin Communities Minister has already refused a community fund to mark this Jubilee. The Sinn Féin Finance Minister has refused to allow a tree to be planted in the grounds of Stormont. And now the Deputy First Minister completes this trilogy of bigotry by blocking moves in the Executive Office. Does the First Minister agree that all the Sinn Féin and Deputy First Ministers talk about respect? All those platitudes reek of hypocrisy when weighed against these actions. And as for the First Minister,
remember, get the question, please.
In the office that he holds, unable to do anything about this, is he in office but not in power?
Put your question.
The member is right to keep the focus on where it should be, and that is to challenge Republicans whenever it comes to the marking of this important celebration. That's where the focus should be, rather than taking an opportunity to have a go on other issues. and the members may well be within his rights to do that, but let's keep the focus on where it is. He has highlighted, as have I, a number of opportunities that Sinn Féin have had to show respect, and they have not met the bar. I hope that they can reflect. This will be a test for them. Again, I'm always an optimist that we can work these things out. There is clearly a need to have proper recognition of this important event, and Sinn Féin, as part of the executive, has an important role in doing that. So let us see over the coming weeks if they are able to meet that test and show the respect and equality that they have often talked about being required of other people.
I call Cathal Boylan.
Cash over 3. Let a hold question number 3, please.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 3, 8 and 14 together. The HIA Redress Board opened to applications at the end of March last year. By the end of October, the Board had received 2,100 applications for redress and paid out over £26 million to applicants or their solicitors. Last week, the junior ministers and I met the President of the Board, Judge Huddleston, to discuss the work of the Board and their engagement with victims and survivors. Responding to the issues raised by victims and survivors, the Deputy First Minister and I have approved the terms of reference for the review of the HIA redress process, and the review should commence in the next few weeks. In relation to the contributions from the 6 institutions identified by the Hart report as being required to make contributions towards the cost of the redress scheme, we held a round-table discussion on the 14th of October that focused on progressing negotiations on contributions. The independent facilitator, Paul Sweeney, has met with all 6 institutions and is continuing his engagements with victims and survivors groups. The delivery of an apology to victims and survivors remains a priority. We are giving consideration to the format and content of the apology, including how the review of the redress process might impact the delivery of the apology. Ministerial and official level engagement with representative groups is ongoing. We are determined victims and survivors will receive the acknowledgement, support and redress that they deserve, and we remain committed to the implementation of all the recommendations in the Hart report.
Cathal Boylan, supplementary.
Does the Minister recognise the importance of a formal apology to those who suffered historical institutional abuse, and does he acknowledge the importance of engaging victims and survivors groups in the apology process?
Well, the member makes a point that victims and survivors have made repeatedly to us, that the official apology is very important and they ought to be at the very centre of that apology. And that is something that we want to see delivered, and delivered in a timely way, but we need to make sure that the victims and survivors feel ownership of that process. And I know with the review of the Redress Board there had been some issues around proceeding with an apology, and we are in a better place in terms of addressing those concerns that should allow us to move forward whenever it comes to making this official apology. But it's important that we get the detail of that right, and that we get the moment right whenever that is delivered.
I call John Stewart.
Mr. Speaker, we often hear about a victim-centred process, and for victims and survivors of historical abuse, key to that was an apology. I spoke to a victim and survivor earlier on today, and they said to me, "We need a break, John, from having to constantly apply pressure on them to do a job that should have been sorted years ago." They took their hand off the wheel and left victims once again having to fight for justice that they promised us in 2011 and 2016. Unreliable, untrustworthy. We tried to put our trust in government, but they have once again abused it, let us down the way the government, state and church let us down in the past. How is this a victim-centred process, Mr. First Minister?
Mr. Speaker, there has been engagement both at official level and ministerial level on this, and there were engagements that were held in September and October, and also working with the Commissioner in respect of this. And Junior Ministers Middleton and Kearney also recently met with victims and survivors groups, and again there was a commitment that there would be continued and regular engagement both at ministerial and official level as work progresses in preparation for the apology being made. So there is absolutely no issue in terms of our commitment at ensuring victims and survivors very much are at the centre of this process.
Before I call the next speaker, I just need to stress the importance of people moving to the question without a long introduction. And I call Daniel McCrossan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the First Minister for the answers to the question so far. He's covered well the question about the apology. But, First Minister, will you undertake to work with the Commissioner to ensure that, that you reach out to the many victims and survivors that are out there and that that's done appropriately?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Commissioner has a very important role and engages with groups on and victims around this issue, and I know within our Executive Office team the Commissioner has an important role to do on that. But again, we will re-emphasise the point that the member has made about the importance of her role in this process.
Call Paul Bradshaw.
Thank you, First Minister, for your answer so far. Just on the subject of the Commissioner, First Minister, how satisfied and assured are you that she, in her office, has enough resources to cope with all the queries coming forward from the victims and survivors? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the budget for the Commissioner's office in the current financial year is just short of £800,000 and obviously is supported from within the Executive Office. So that does help her office in terms of supporting staffing arrangements and the governance and infrastructure that is required. If there are issues around resources being necessary that hasn't been brought to our attention, obviously we would want to know about that, but we are advised that there is the support that's being provided to the Commissioner, Fiona Ryan, in terms of her being able to do her job.
George Robinson.
And my apologies, Chair, Mr. Speaker. And could I ask the First Minister's assessment of the recent meeting with institutions about financial contributions? And my apology again.
Mr. Speaker, this is an important piece of work that we have had the independent facilitator take forward, Paul Sweeney, who is a former permanent secretary but is absolutely independent but has expertise in this. I know that he has met with the 6 different institutions and we'll be anticipating getting an official report from Paul Sweeney in due course to provide us with the feedback from the institutions, because having financial contributions for them is something that the victims and survivors has said is very important as part of that acknowledgement that there is then financial contributions that come to the institutions. But we would hope to receive a report shortly from Paul Sweeney in terms of that engagement.
Thank you, and I call Sinead McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, First Minister, for your answer so far. It's back to the apology process again, I'm afraid. The Executive Office received a brief from the Commissioner last Wednesday in which she has made a recommendation that to decouple the redress and the review from the apology. Based on that recommendation, can you set in place a date that the victims and survivors will receive a heartfelt apology from this state, please?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member is right in terms of those 2 issues having had some overlap. We believe that there has been progress made to decouple that in terms of allowing the work to go forward. So we do have an apology project group which has been set up, and that includes officials, it includes survivors of institutional child abuse, the victims and survivor service as well within that. So there is a proper group that is taking this forward, and that is currently discussing the practical arrangements and has been focused on ensuring those victims and survivors are supported before, during and after the apology process takes place.
I call William Irwin.
Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Executive met on the 17th of November where they discussed the issue of COVID status certification. At the meeting, agreement in principle was reached for the introduction of certification to begin on the 29th of November, with an initial 2-week grace period followed by enforcement beginning on the 12th of December. COVID status certification has a primary focus on indoor and outdoor events, nightclubs, licensed hospitality and other premises that permit the consumption of intoxicating liquor, cinemas, theatres and conference centres. The Minister for Health brought an additional paper to the Executive on the 22nd of November to discuss other contingency measures in the autumn-winter plan and how these could be deployed in tandem with certification.
William Irwin, supplementary.
Thank the First Minister for his response. When we advised by the Health Minister that he was having difficulties putting into legislation the obligations that he wanted for cafes and coffee shops?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was on Friday that the Minister for Health provided a paper to executive colleagues in terms of the issues around non-licensed hospitality and the inability to be able to get that drafted and contained within regulations that would allow it to be enforceable. And that has led to the subsequent public announcements that were then made by the Minister for Health that those forms of hospitality were not going to be included in terms of the decisions that had been taken by a majority of the members on the executive in respect of COVID certification.
I call Colm Gilder now.
Minister, we are still in the midst of an ongoing and an unprecedented health crisis and potentially facing a very difficult winter that threatens to pile more pressure on an already beleaguered health and social care system. Maintaining a strong public health messaging will be crucial to protecting our healthcare service in the time ahead. So can the First Minister give a commitment that we will see no more intemperate or ill-judged outbursts from outliers in his party who seem determined to undermine the public health messaging?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is important that the executive does the right things and focuses its energy and efforts in those measures that will have real, tangible benefits, and that's why I continue to advocate for people who haven't been vaccinated to take up the vaccine, for those that haven't received their booster jab to take the booster jab. We announced collectively a re-emphasis of that important messaging whenever it comes to personal responsibility and actions that we can all take. But in respect of the issue to do with mandatory COVID certification processes, this was a politically driven decision. It was not evidence-based. And that is what has brought the executive into controversy. And I warned at the time that we shouldn't be engaging in divisive and distractive policies, but that we should be focusing on those measures that actually will see real benefits. And whenever I think about this particular issue around COVID certification, instead of a thought-out, orderly plan to make this happen, there has been a last-minute scramble from the parties in government, and they are producing legislation to be rushed through this week, which is discriminatory, which is ill thought out, and which many will regard as unenforceable. Not my words, but the words of Mary Lou MacDonald.
Claire Bailey.
I would like to ask the First Minister if he has attended any events or any venues where he had to provide any certifications to date, and if so, could he tell us how straightforward and non-discriminatory that process was?
Mr. Speaker, there have been occasions. There was a dinner for the Northern Ireland Chamber within the waterfront where, upon entry, they asked to see my COVID certification, which I happily provided to them. And that was a straightforward process for a dinner which I think there was around 600 people, and indeed the measures that were put in place were well distanced and in a well-ventilated room, and that's what we have been saying as an executive, and I said that last week. I want places to be able to be open, to stay open, to operate safely, and for people to take personal responsibility, and when you're moving about, to wear that face covering where that is required within regulations. So there have been examples that, yes, I can cite that have worked well. What I would say is those measures have been put in place on a voluntary basis. It is a very different proposition for a government to move to voluntary approaches to mandating it, and then to mandate it upon coffee shops, for example, that have 15 people as their maximum capacity, compared to a stadium that could take over 20,000. And they will be subjected to the exact same level of financial penalty as those large-scale organisers. I believe that it's disproportionate. But even more worryingly, it was not evidence-based. There was no equality impact assessment carried out. There was no legal advice provided to the executive from its human rights opinion. There wasn't an assessment as to the effectiveness or otherwise of reducing the transmission. And that was the decision upon which a majority of parties proceeded. I think that was the wrong approach to do, but I re-emphasise all of the other points. Get your vaccination, take up the booster jab, practice personal responsibility, and they will be the most effective measures rather than a divisive, distractive policy that political parties put through because of a political agenda rather than an evidence-based approach.
Well, Jim Allister.
Minister, could the First Minister clarify two things? Was the project for certification as approved by the Executive on a rolling basis, as now appears to be the case? And secondly, when will this House be voting on these regulations?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there was no phased introduction that the majority of executive members voted for. It was hospitality in all its forms, where there was food and drink being served. And so the characterisation of this by the Department of Health as a phased introduction is not reflective of the majority of the executive that voted for the policy. And I think it's important that whenever people speak about this, they give the accurate position that the executive voted upon. I understand the arguments being made by Minister Swan that because of the rushed nature of this policy being brought through, they haven't been able to bottom out the regulations when it comes to unlicensed coffee shops and hospitality, for example. In respect of when this Assembly should vote on it, I want the Assembly to vote on this before this would commence. And again, I'm seeking clarity because Department of Health had said this would be published on Friday last week. Then it was going to be Monday, and now it's in draft form. So it would appear that these regulations haven't actually been made in law yet, and therefore the grace period that would come 2 weeks later, I'm not clear if that clock has now started ticking today, but the Assembly should be voting on this. I understand that should take place next week. And I would appeal to the other parties in this place, reflect upon the decisions that you've taken. There is opportunity not to proceed, and the Minister for Health, as my Economy Minister has advocated, should not proceed on this. But other colleagues in this place will have an opportunity to vote on it. I'll be voting against them, which is consistent to what I've done in the Executive. But I would appeal to other colleagues to reflect in their position and to vote against these regulations whenever they come before the Assembly.
Call Colin McGrath.
Mr. Speaker, the First Minister has mentioned that there are divisive and destructive and distractive policies being pursued by others, but does he not agree that his own members are actually being divisive, that they are being destructive, that they are distracting from what should be a clear and concise public message in the middle of a global pandemic, that we ensure the safety of our citizens and not create confusion and bluster? And that includes some rogue ministers in his own midst.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the member about the need for consistency, a need for that collective approach. But it was 6 other ministers that decided not to go down a collective approach and pursued a policy which was not based upon evidence. And the members opposite raised their eyebrows. This is a party of civil rights, and yet no equality impact assessment has been carried out. No human rights legal opinion had been provided to the Executive, upon which the decision was then taken. I think the public will have much more buy-in to decisions that are based upon evidence. There is no evidence for mandatory COVID vaccine passports being brought forward in terms of their effectiveness at reducing transmission. I think the public expect us to take evidence-based decisions, and that will gain collective consensual approaches.
I call Keith Buchanan, and you probably will not get a supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 5, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are implications for Northern Ireland and the Executive. COP26 agreed plans to reduce the use of coal and fossil fuel globally, which will help keep the challenging target of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees within reach. There is now a plan for moving forward, and every country must produce their own plans by the end of next year. The implications for us are that we must also play our part in contributing to these targets by making the necessary changes to what we do, and to fully implement our green growth, energy, environment and cleaner transport strategies. We will also look to share and learn from best practice on the challenges of climate change, and we will be discussing this with some of our other overseas partners over coming weeks. COP26 recognises there is a lot of work to be done, but we are committed to our strategies and plans for the way forward.
A very brief question and response, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Minister. So far, Minister, what was the representation from Northern Ireland at COP26, and how did that come across to you?
Mr. Speaker, Northern Ireland did put its best foot forward at COP26, and we had organisations that included the Armagh Observatory and Planetarium, the Northern Ireland Environment Link, Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful, Artemis technologies within my own constituency, Rightbus, the Ulster Farmers Union, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, and then public representatives including NILGA, Danske Bank, and all of these organisations, to which there were more, I believe represented Northern Ireland in a very positive light and showed the kind of strategies that we are taking forward, where we recognise the seriousness of this and are making real tangible differences to tackling our contribution towards climate change.
Thank you. And that ends the period for a list of questions, and I now move on to 15 minutes of topical questions. I call Kelly Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I was interested to hear the First Minister talking about equality. First Minister, you'll be aware that the Ad Hoc Committee on a Bill of Rights has suspended its meeting until the panel of experts has been appointed by your office. Can you please provide an update on this process?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, it's a matter for the Ad Hoc Committee within this Assembly as to whether it wishes to continue to do its work. That shouldn't be predicated upon this particular issue. The Ad Hoc Committee is at liberty, which it has done, I believe, to get its own expert advice in terms of its approach to tackling this particular piece of legislation.
Supplementary, Kelly Armstrong.
I'm somewhat surprised by that question, First Minister. Could I ask then, what will you and the Deputy First Minister do to ensure that this new decade, new approach commitment to deliver a Bill of Rights is not breached?
Well, Mr Speaker, the Ad Hoc Committee has been taking forward this work, so I look forward to seeing the completed report from the committee, and that will obviously help shape what the next steps will be.
I call Stephen Dunn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I ask the First Minister if he can provide an update on hospitalisations as a result of COVID? Thank you.
Well, Mr Speaker, the member rightly raises an issue where we all know the pressures that are facing our health service. And indeed, it was on this issue that the Minister for Health brought forward, and other parties supported the proposition around COVID passports. And nobody should be complacent. We should all make every possible effort. But when I look at the current levels of hospitalisations, I think there is hope that people can look towards, and I think we do need to give people hope, as opposed to a constant level of anxiety and fear. And as of today, we have 318 beds being occupied by people that have COVID. That is a significant reduction from where we were even a week ago. We have 28 people in intensive care. At the end of the late summer, that figure was at 49. So we've had a reduction in the number of people in ICU. We've had a reduction in the number of occupied beds. And during this current wave, we had at one point a peak of inpatients that were sitting at 527. As of today, that's at 340. So I want to commend those that are making efforts and that are taking up that booster jab, because we are seeing the differences now in our hospitals and even within our care homes. In September, we had 135 outbreaks. That's now down to 32. So the evidence would show that the measures that are being taken around the rollout of the booster campaign, which we need to see accelerated and more taken up, is having a real impact upon the pressures in our health service. That's why I go back to the question that if the introduction of mandatory COVID passports was based upon the pressures in our health service, those pressures today are less than where they were even a week ago. Now, we need to continue to monitor that, but based upon the evidence, the question needs to be asked, why would we be pursuing a mandatory scheme when we have had the levels of reductions upon our hospitals within intensive care, within the general occupied bed occupancy rate, and the reduction in our nursing homes?
Stephen Dunn, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank the First Minister for his answer. If the numbers have indeed been stabilising, why was there such a rush, do you think, to implement mandatory COVID vaccine passports?
Well, Mr Speaker, these are questions that those within the pro-passport party coalition need to answer. Based upon the evidence around hospitalisations and the pressures within our health service, why pursue a divisive, distractive policy which is not based upon evidence? I continue to appeal to people, take personal responsibility, increase the efforts that you're making in getting your booster jab, because that is having a real tangible benefit. But the other members in this House have an opportunity to reflect on the position that they have taken, and I hope that they do that, and that these regulations are not brought forward, and that the Assembly, if they are brought forward, would vote them down.
Allocations not in his place, and I call Dolores Kelly.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Following the judgment by Justice Schofield on the 19th of October in relation to ministerial authority under the Executive Committee Functions Act 2020, can the First Minister outline the reason for the delay in bringing forward proposals to amend the Ministerial Code to provide legal certainty for planning decisions taken by the Infrastructure Minister, and will you now give a clear commitment to take this forward urgently?
Mr Speaker, the member raises an important point which the Minister for Infrastructure did correspond with the Executive Office around the outworkings of that judgment. It is important that the Ministerial Code can get agreement for that to clarify the issue, particularly for the Minister for Infrastructure. I have cleared a submission within the Executive Office for that to be taken forward, and we're awaiting the final sign-off within the Executive for that, but I would like to be able to bring that to the Executive as soon as possible.
Dolores Kelly, supplementary.
Thanks for the answer, First Minister, and I hope it will be given the answer sooner rather than later, because we all know about the importance of infrastructure in driving forward the economy. Can you provide any update on the establishment of the Commission for Infrastructure?
Yes, Mr Speaker, that is a piece of work that the Permanent Secretary within the Executive Office is taking forward, engaging with the other departments so that we can assess what such a commission would look like, where there is currently work taking place, to ensure that there isn't any duplication in terms of taking forward that infrastructure commission. So that is an active piece of work that's being taken forward by the Executive Office.
Call Jerry Carroll.
NIPSA education welfare officers, UCU lecturers and education workers on strike this week. What's your message to both groups of workers as they embark on industrial action this week?
Sorry, Mr Speaker, I just missed the last part of it, but in terms of industrial action, as a general school of thought, I always believe that it is best to get agreed, negotiated outcomes rather than resorting to industrial action. I think that should always be an absolute last resort for any sector to take, and I would hope that we're able to get an agreed way forward on whatever this particular issue is that the member has raised.
Terry Carroll, supplementary.
Thank you. It's disappointing the Minister couldn't say he supports workers taking action, but workers are calling for the Education Minister to intervene to fund the pay disparity the education welfare officers are facing. They're calling for the Economies Minister to intervene to pressure universities to make sure workers aren't paid low wages. So will the Minister intervene and make sure both those ministers act to resolve these workers' issues?
Well, Mr Speaker, I absolutely support workers' rights and particularly within education, because whether you're a teacher or a welfare support officer in this case, or a university or a further educational college lecturer, they carry out hugely important work and they're absolutely highly respected and regarded within society, and it is vital that they are appropriately remunerated for the work that they carry out. So I would hope there can be a resolution to the issues that the member has raised within the Assembly, because I think it is important that those within our teaching community are able to get on and deliver the job that they want to do.
I call Robin Newton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the First Minister for his answers so far. First Minister, over this past 12-18 months in this chamber, we have argued for the proposal for a 3-year budget, and I think that has been largely accepted now. Can I ask the First Minister what work has been done to actually put in place all the necessary mechanisms for a 3-year budget to come forward?
Mr Speaker, the member is right in terms of the importance of having a multi-year budget to facilitate that more strategic planning rather than living year to year. And as a result of the comprehensive spending review that the Chancellor announced, we now know the allocation that Northern Ireland has received in each of the next 3 years. And yes, it has been an increase in our budget, not everything being funded that we would want to be able to do, but that then requires the Executive to really look at the kind of priorities that we would have as an Executive. So I can assure the member that there is work. It has been carried out in terms of assessing that 3-year allocation of both recurrent funding and capital funding, and there is an ongoing process now across the departments within the Executive to take this forward.
Supplementary, Robin Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think that the Minister made reference to a strategic approach to this. Can I ask the Minister, in the past one-year budgets, nearly a reactive situation has been to pump more and more money into health. In a strategic look that we now have in a multi-year budget, how will health be treated over the period of the 3 years or 3 rolling years?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we all know the pressures that our health service is under, and it is the #1 priority for me and for my party, and that is shared across the Executive. And so the funding allocations that would be made, indeed that are proposed for the next 3 years, does give health that priority. Things like tackling the waiting list for elective care procedures, that is something that we all agree on that needs to be taken forward. But we also need to have that transformation take place within the health service so that we're not just treating the symptoms of a system which isn't able to cope. And so in addition to addressing the waiting list backlog, there also would need to be financial support to deliver on that transformation of the health service. That will be, I think, reflected whenever the budget is published for consultation. And this Thursday at the Executive, the budget will be discussed again by ministers, and I would hope that we will be in a position where very soon we can put that out to public consultation to get the public's views before you would be getting an agreed final settlement.
I call William Humphrey.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the First Minister for his answer so far. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been speaking to contractors, one of whom is building a new park in North Belfast to Market Centenary in Northern Ireland, the other building private housing in the constituency, both of whom have said to me they're having problems in getting materials for the development of their contracts. Can I ask the Minister for his assessment of the efforts over the weekend to highlight the issues, the ongoing issues, and the problems that the protocol is causing for Northern Ireland?
Mr. Speaker, it's a problem for a lot of businesses in terms of that supply chain. So whether it's for goods or, in this case, supply material, that is an issue that contractors are having trying to source that. It isn't just unique to Northern Ireland, and I've no doubt that there are implications from the protocol in terms of accessing goods, but there is a worldwide demand as well on goods, particularly timber, because of the infrastructure projects that are being taken forward on a huge scale in places like the United States, and that is buying up the availability of the materials, and that is pushing the prices up right across the globe. So he is right to highlight the issues around contractors and the difficulties to get materials. That is contributing to delays in build programmes, but it's also increasing the costs. That's why the Executive did agree, when it comes to procurement, a more flexible approach so that projects were not lost because of cost inflation, and on a case-by-case basis that is something where executive departments are working with contractors to make sure that they can continue to deliver on these projects.
Supplementary, William Humphrey.
Thank you. I thank the First Minister for his answer. The Jewish community has ongoing problems in securing kosher meat for their community here in Northern Ireland. That has been raised as high as the Prime Minister. I thank your predecessor for the work that she did around this issue, but it's a problem that's ongoing, as is the supply of trees to mark the centenary of Northern Ireland and the Queen's Canopy. These are issues that are effectively affecting negatively our people in Northern Ireland right across the community. Can the First Minister assure this House that the work will continue to ensure that the protocol and the difficulties it's causing will be removed?
Mr. Speaker, the member raises an important point, that whilst for a huge majority of the population having kosher meat is not an issue, but for a very important part of our community, the Jewish community, it is. And disturbingly, when I have raised this with UK government secretaries of state, they are alarmed at the response that they've had from Europe when this is raised as a result of the protocol and the dismissive nature at times, not understanding the impact that it's having on the Jewish community. And I know from his representation, from speaking to the rabbi in Belfast, this is having a real impact on the very small Jewish community, because it is something that's absolutely important to them because of their beliefs. So that is one issue. The Queen's Canopy is another issue in terms of our ability to get those trees into Northern Ireland. And beyond that, the points are well made around the diversion of trade as a result of the protocol and the wider societal impact that it is having. It is for all those reasons that we need to see a resolution in the process that is currently taking place between the UK Government and the European Union.
And members' time is up. Members, please take your ease for a moment or two. We move on to the next item.